the North Brooklyn Boat Club, and I'm just going to talk about, we're a relatively new organization. We got our site about a year ago, and so last summer was our first season. I'm happy to talk more about the club afterwards, and I'll have some postcards and stuff, and there's a handful of people here that have been out with us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the observations that we've had, and mostly this is stuff that Fung and I have both documented within the creek. And to me, part of the interest in boating, most of the boat stuff we do is on the East River, most people that come through the club, but we also do stuff on the creek as well. And to me, it's really interesting because being in a canoe offers you a vantage point that's really unique to see a lot of stuff like that you wouldn't otherwise by the land or in a ferry or whatever. So this is being out on the water. You start to notice a lot of things, especially when you start looking up for it. So these are a couple sites that, in particular, we found some interesting wildlife that's returning to the creek. And so that's where we are in the yellow, the boatyard right underneath the Pulaski Bridge. So you actually come by at some point. Nature Walk, Dutch Kills, obviously. Bushwick Inlet, which we won't talk about because it's not the creek. And Massabeth Creek as well. So this is a real overview of some of the different things that we have seen and photographed. But first we're going to talk about water quality testing. So we took part in a study this summer that was really true citizen science organized by the New York City Water Trail Association, which is focused a lot on access for human-powered boating. And so the impetus for it was that, like you heard, Riverkeeper does a lot of testing, and DEP has been doing water testing for years, but most of that is always in the middle of the channel of a waterway. And so what the New York City Water Trail Association wanted to do was see, is that different than the water that a boater, a kayaker for instance, would be more likely to be exposed to, which is at your dock where you're leaving. So, so we took part with NCA, and we sampled every week throughout the summer, and we brought the samples either to Manhattan, and we started taking them here to LaGuardia, which is cool, and we also canoed them over a couple times, which is pretty fun. So if anyone wants to canoe a sample over during the summer, let me know. And then we decided to paint our results from the summer onto our mural, so you can actually see this. Many of you guys have seen this on Pulaski Bridge. And so it's kind of an abstraction, but it basically just relates to the EPA standards, and again, this is inner focus of how much is in the water. And what you can see here is the red is basically the bad events, where there's the most colonies in the water. So that's basically when you would not want to be exposed to the water. And then the numbers that are in the corner are the corresponding rainfall within 24 hours before testing. So, and these are the larger events over a quarter inch. So you can see they're basically all on red days. So it's kind of an abstracted thing, and on the website there you can find out more. But the general idea is citizen science is cool. Okay, here is another thing that we've, NCA has been doing a lot of birdwatching tours, and we did one via canoe last year, and we're going to do some more this year as well, so that should be cool. But this is a list of the birds that we have seen so far, and it's still growing. I think we're going to have to add another page here, and kind of a maze here, but we've seen more and more, and it's great. There's a really awesome diversity of different birds and waterfowl and herons and all that. So this is, I don't know, do we have a printout of this here?
We don't have a printout here, but we will actually have a bunch of hard copies by the end of March. Cool,
so keep eyes out for that. So that's the birds. This was a photo, there's Mitch hanging in there in the middle. This is a photo from the birdwatching tour that we did, which is pretty cool. We saw an osprey, which was a first for, I think, everybody on the creek. And so, like I said, we're going to do some more birdwatching tours with NCA. Here's a typical, this is not on the birdwatching tour, but here's an egret. This is down near the BQE. So this is, we're getting into other wildlife, so I'm just going to go through some different animals and stuff. This is a picture, it's kind of bad quality. This is a cormorant with a fish in its mouth. You heard Sarah mention that as well. Fung also witnessed a cormorant wrestling with an eel earlier in the season as well. So it is pretty cool being by the water. There is, it's very non-Greenpoint New York City to see a cormorant eating a fish out of the water like this in such a raw sort of setting. So Here's a heron. This is at the entrance to Dutch Kills there. Blue crab, we see lots of blue crab in the summer. And,
there's one in back.
Huh? There's one in back, yeah. So, and all this stuff too, like this was, kind of informal documentation. I think we'd like to start employing a little bit more science to it, maybe measuring some of the samples and keeping better track of where they are. But the crabs are very prominent this summer. This is one swimming. This was a pretty large one, and this was all the way down by Maspeth. He was paddling through the middle of the creek. This is what they call dolphin, the piling that's off of our bulkhead here, and you can see there's a number of crabs. And again, this sort of gets to the thing that you can look at the creek, and until you really are looking at it, there's so much wildlife there. And so there's three different crabs, and actually I think there's 2 pairs there during mating season. So lots of crabs. Here's another one. So sometimes we find ones that are dead, or a bird will try to eat them, and they'll be on our bulkhead. So take them out. It's not a blue crab. This is a mud crab. Is that what it's called? It's a little invasive one. They're super small. We found them burrowing down in the mud. This was recently. We saw this in Dutch Kills. I'm still not sure what kind of, pardon the lack of biology background. This is a fish we saw about maybe 12 inches or so last month, and this was in Dutch Kills at the entrance. And you can also see the bottom of the floor there. We know a lot about the sediments or we will know a lot more with the EPA results, but the Newtown Creek, the sediment is the real issue with the pollution. But here we can even see, even at the mouth of Dutch Kills, that there's life, there's stuff growing on the actual bottom of the floor. Grass shrimp, we were able to catch a couple here. You can see in this photo too, there's probably 15 shrimp in that photo.
There's one in back.
There's one in back, great, okay. Jellyfish, hard to photograph, but jellyfish in the summer. Mud snails, this is also seen recently. Okay, great. And this is also at the mouth of Dutch Kills. So you can see there's probably
Tons.
Yeah, hundreds of photographs.
Mud snails can enter in.
Huh?
They're like little tanks.
Little tanks, yeah.
When you go to the nature walk, there's like thousands of them.
Yeah, so it's really cool to see it and to see it throughout the creek.
Awesome.
Mussels are really, I think, to me, they're everywhere, and the way they occupy some of the space in the creek is really interesting. So anywhere, we've noticed any place that there's a crevice for them to crawl into is where you'll find them. So this is, again, the entrance of Dutch Kills here, and where you have places where there's a joint between the wood, they really like to cluster. So it's hard to find those, like in a natural salt marsh, like in Jamaica Bay, where they sort of cluster together at the bottom of the grasses. We don't really have that sort of terrain, so they're finding these other places, as well as a lot of the riprap, the rocks. They're in there, they're just hard to see. They're sort of jammed in the back. But there's some really interesting ways that they pack in. Again, another picture of a bulkhead, and you can see between the concrete and the timber on the top there, they're all jammed in there, so there's just thousands and thousands of them. Oysters was the big surprise for us. So this was right near our site, and we didn't believe it when we first saw it, and we went down and cleaned it off. And indeed, there are oysters, and we found numbers of them throughout the creek. Here's us getting a little bit more scientific, getting an idea how big they are. This one's relatively small. The other one I showed right here, this is like the largest one we've seen, and it's about 4 inches or so. It's pretty big. So it's been there for a while too, which is a good sign. We also had to do a little investigation because there was some that we had seen, like this one, where the coloring was different, and some of them had to adhere differently to the substrate. And we found out that they're still the same. They're not an invasive species, but they're just a different genus. And it's also, we'll talk about it later, but it's an interesting foray into this world of finding out, is this the same? What is this? Is it the same stuff? And a lot of the oysters, too, are difficult to find because they're this one we'd cleaned off, they're so covered in the muck and with barnacles and all that. But they are there, growing on tires. So again, this is an example like this one on the left. We didn't think it was an oyster because the way it doesn't have that cup, it's all sort of molded down. But we talked to some oyster experts and they said yes. Again, another oyster. And here's another one. So this is, you can see they're kind of, sometimes they're hard to see. And most of the stuff, a lot of the oysters and a lot of the life in general, it's a big difference going out between low and high tide. And low tide is interesting being in a canoe in the creek because it's much more ominous. The bulkheads are much higher. You sort of feel like you're closer to the sediment. And but at the same time, it's really, to me, a lot more fascinating because you can see a lot more of the wildlife. So you can see those oysters right below.
Barnacles?
Uh-huh.
No, those little,
Well,
those are the anemones.
Anemones, yeah, but barnacles all around it. Yeah, so all around. Raccoons, yeah. There's 2 of them. There's another one hiding there. This was down by Mazda. Yeah, there's a fair amount of raccoons. There's also, Mitch might talk about, there's been reports of a beaver.
A muskrat or a beaver?
A muskrat or a beaver, so I don't know. Keep your eyes out. There is a beaver in the Bronx River, but they probably better habitat up there. This is really interesting stuff that we didn't see until the winter time. Another thing I realized too, the water level can be a little bit lower during times in the winter, and so this is usually in the summer. This piling was always covered, so we never really saw this. But these are tunicates, and they're a form of a filter feeder, and they're really, I mean, they look from out of this world, and again, they're hard to see unless you're right there, a foot away from it. But we found that a lot of the piers near our launch site are covered in this. But you only really see them on these really, really low water events. The bright orange ones are kind of easier to spot from far away, and I think I'd seen some of them and sort of thought they might have been a rust, some version of rust or something like that. But that's it. This is inside of a CSO, and this is just to show that even in a CSO, which seems like a very dark and place where life wouldn't be, there's lots of life. And I should have put some markers, but there's an oyster on the far left there, and you can see this is all covered in barnacles, and there's snails on the bottom. And here's another oyster on this is the entrance of it, another oyster there. Well, that one I think is dead, but lots of snails, barnacles. So it's interesting, it's all these places around. This, I think, is the last slide, and this is, as you can see, this was taken pretty recently, and it's a really low water event, and it shows how some of these areas, too, are much more shallow than at least Swedish builders had thought, and so some of these natural topographies of a mud flat are coming back into the creek. So this is Dutch Kills, they're at the entrance between the 2 train tracks, and that's where we'd see the fish and the mud snails and all that stuff. So all that to say, we're going to be doing a lot more looking around the creek for wildlife, and hopefully getting more rigor behind how we can document stuff like that. We're also working with Newtown Creek Alliance to develop more things to encourage the filter feeder organisms that are already around there, specifically like stuff like mussels, and how we can get more of them in the creek and clean things up. That's it.